A Second Chance at Love. Previous episodes are available in playlist, a link is given in the video description. Episode 19. Someone from the Queen family who ordered you to do it? Spill the truth. I want to know who in Queen group dared to defy my orders. Alfred declared furiously. Hearing that, Rex was close to tears. If I reveal the person right now, old Mr. Queen will definitely punish her. I don't dare to do that. As he didn't utter a word, Alfred harumphed unhappily. Since you refuse to say anything, I'll assume it was your idea. He whipped his head around and told Jonathan, he works for you, so you can decide what to do with him. Rex didn't want to be held accountable for such a huge mistake, so he immediately protested, No, old Mr. Queen. I dare not do that. Who is it then? Jonathan rose to his feet and glowered at him. The chilling aura surrounding his body was almost palpable. Alex lowered his head and revealed cautiously, It is Ms. Frida. Frida? Hearing that, Jonathan and Alfred could barely hide their shock. They couldn't understand why Frida would do something detrimental to the Queen family when she was one of them. Besides, Frida was present when Roxanne cured Alfred's condition. She should know that the Queen family owed Roxanne more than anyone else. Ms. Frida told me it was your order, so I didn't think much about it. I only realized it wasn't your order when you called me earlier. Rex was filled with remorse. Mr. Queen, I didn't mean to defy your order. I dare not do so. Jonathan gave him a dismissive wave in irritation. Got it. Next time, ask for my instructions whenever it is anything that concerns Dr. Jarvis. Rex promptly reassured him that he would do that. Remember to arrange for the delivery of the medicinal herbs that Dr. Jarvis Research Institute need as soon as you get back. I'll call Dr. Jarvis to check if she receives it, Jonathan ordered. You should also apologize to her. Yes, came Rex's answer. With that, Jonathan told Rex to leave. Soon, only Alfred and Jonathan were left in the living room. Their expressions were dark when they recalled Rex's words. When Roxanne first showed up, Jonathan realized Frida didn't like her, but he didn't know Frida would cause trouble for Roxanne in public. Why is Frida so insensible? Grandpa, what should I do next? Jonathan sought Alfred's advice as he was at a loss. Alfred was boiling with anger. Group's reputation. In fact, the culprit was his granddaughter. Ask her to come back now. That spoiled brat is bold enough to do anything now, hey. Alfred huffed. Jonathan nodded and gave Frida a call. Frida had expected his call, so she answered the call calmly. Jonathan, what is it? Furious, Jonathan declared, How dare you ask me that? Come back home now. Frida rolled her eyes in disdain and replied slowly, Got it. I'll go home now. Before Jonathan could say anything else, she hung up. I didn't do anything wrong. Jonathan got angry for nothing. However, she felt guilty for doing that behind Jonathan's back. Back in the Queen residence, Jonathan shot his phone a death stare. Taking sides. Around half an hour later, Frida arrived and strode into the house cockily. She only put her arrogance aside when she realized Alfred was sitting on the couch. You are here, Grandpa, Frida greeted Alfred with a pang of guilt. Alfred threw her a displeased look and scoffed. Frida rubbed her nose idly and made to join them on the couch. Stand right there! Jonathan snapped. Frida halted in her tracks unwillingly. As Alfred was around, she returned to her spot and stood there silently. Do you know why I asked you to come home? Jonathan demanded. Frida pursed her lips and feigned ignorance. I don't know. I was shopping when you asked me to come back. Why are you upset? Jonathan wore a wintry expression. Did you order Rex not to provide medicinal herbs to Dr. Jarvis Research Institute? Frida nodded indifferently. Seeing her response, Alfred and Jonathan shared a look of confusion. Ever since Frida first met Roxanne, she had been at odds with the latter. Her grudge nearly caused Queen Group's reputation to take a fall, but she didn't think she was wrong. Why did you do that? Jonathan furrowed his brows. Frida pretended to be surprised. Jonathan, don't you know that all the medicinal herb suppliers have been warned by Farwell Group not to supply any medicinal herbs to Roxanne? If we continue supplying medicinal herbs to her, we're announcing that we're going against Farwell Group. A flash of surprise appeared in Jonathan's gaze. No wonder Roxanne said all the other medicinal herb suppliers stopped supplying the research institute with medicinal herbs when she came here in the morning. However, she didn't explain why. It turns out that Farwell Group was behind it. Jonathan recalled that Lucian and Roxanne seemed to be on good terms previously. In fact, Lucian defended Roxanne more than once. Thus, he couldn't understand why Roxanne was targeted. As he frowned in puzzlement, Frida added, Mrs. Farwell didn't say anything to us as we're close to them. But since we're working closely with Farwell Group, shouldn't we side with them? We will be going against Mrs. Farwell if we insist on providing medicinal herbs to Roxanne's Research Institute as per our promise. If Mrs. Farwell gets upset, she might cause trouble for us. Jonathan's frown deepened. Are you saying that Mrs. Farwell gave the order? Why did she do that? Frida shot him a smug grin. You don't know about this, huh? Roxanne is Lucian's ex-wife, and Mrs. Farwell didn't like her at all. It so happened that I hated her, too. Thus, I took the chance to teach her a lesson. Before Frida could finish her sentence, Jonathan had guessed her intention. He leaped up from the couch abruptly. Frida's voice trailed off in shock. Shut up! You're part of the Queen family. How could you say that? If word gets out, people will definitely laugh at us. Queen Group has built its reputation painstakingly over the years, so there is no need to take sides to show our stance. Jonathan stormed over to her and threw her a glare. Stay out of it! Frida took 2 steps back subconsciously as she defended herself. Did I say anything wrong? If Queen Group lands into trouble because we go against Farwell Group, that will be a huge crisis. Jonathan felt his temples throbbing. Clenching his jaw, he admonished, Do you know why Queen Group can stand tall for over a century? Frida hung her head low and said nothing. That's because we deliver what we promise. Jonathan shot her a disappointed look. If we give up on our principle easily because of personal matters, Queen Group will lose the credibility to do business in the medical industry. Frida cowered back and glanced at Alfred cautiously. She said humbly, Jonathan, I'm doing this for Queen Group's sake. No company in Harrington dares to go against Farwell Group. Mrs. Farwell warned every medicinal herb supplier in Harrington to stay away from Roxanne. If we don't do the same, how will she think of us? Our relationship with Farwell Group might take a toll. It isn't worth the risk. She then glanced at Jonathan to gauge his reaction. Jonathan stared at her icily and waited for her to devise more excuses to justify her foolish actions. Don't you know what Roxanne did to the Farwell family 6 years ago? She deserves to get punished for her irresponsible actions. Frida tried to add fuel to the fire. Right after she said that, Jonathan let out an icy snort. Frida's heart leaped to her throat as she shot him a perplexed look. You remember what Dr. Jarvis did to the Farwell family 6 years ago, so I believe you still remember how Dr. Jarvis cured Grandpa a while ago. The more Frida spoke, the more ridiculous Jonathan felt. He promptly exposed Frida's lousy excuse. Taken aback, Frida turned to look at Alfred instinctively. Based on what Jonathan said, it was clear that Alfred had made up his mind. Grandpa, Frida's voice softened when she belatedly realized that she should act coy to Alfred. After hearing her excuses, Alfred was puzzled and exhausted. He had treated his grandchildren equally over the years and taught them personally. However, Frida grew up as an ungrateful young lady with extreme behavior. Does she not respect me at all? Disappointment flooded Alfred's heart as he gave Frida a crestfallen look. Don't turn to me. Dr. Jarvis saved my life, and I made that clear during the banquet that we should treat Dr. Jarvis as our family. How could you do that to her? Frida hurriedly explained, Grandpa, you've gotten it wrong. Alfred interjected, will you admit to your mistake? His voice was stern as he stared at her intently. Frida fell silent, but the fear on her face turned to indignance. Indeed, she had her reason for doing that, but she also did it for the sake of Queen Group. How dare they question me now? They will realize they are wrong when Farwell Group causes trouble for them in the future. As she didn't seem to regret her actions, Alfred shook his head in disappointment. From today onward, you aren't allowed to interfere in Queen Group's business anymore. Jonathan will be in charge of Queen Group solely. Frida's head whipped up in shock at her grandfather's words. Before she could protest, Alfred gestured for Jonathan to take him upstairs. He didn't want to stay back and listen to her nonsense. Think of another way upstairs, Alfred let out a sigh. Keep an eye on Frida. She's reckless, so I'm afraid she'll do something foolish, he told Jonathan. Jonathan agreed to his request hastily. Don't worry. Also, don't take Frida's words to heart. We shall supply Dr. Jarvis with the medicinal herbs she needs. I shall bear the responsibility if Farwell Group causes trouble for us. Alfred reminded, Queen Group honors its promise, so we can't break our principle. Jonathan nodded in response. I'll call Dr. Jarvis now to explain the situation to her, he said. Alfred shot him a curt nod. You can leave now. I'm tired. After learning what Frida did, Alfred had gone cold with fury. Exhaustion only caught up to him after he dealt with the matter. After helping Alfred to get into bed, Jonathan left the bedroom. He then gave Roxanne a call. Meanwhile, Roxanne was feeling heavy-hearted in her office. It was getting dark, but Queen Group still hadn't reverted to her. She started suspecting that Colby was right. Queen Group promised to investigate the matter, but it was just an excuse to brush her off. If he's right, I'll have to figure out a way to contact the medicinal herb suppliers in the neighboring city. It will take time to deliver the medicinal herbs, but that's the only way for now. I wonder if those people have received warning from Farwell Group. With that thought in mind, Roxanne pulled her phone out to call the seniors she met at a previous academic conference. She had just gotten her phone when it started vibrating and ringing. Stunned, Roxanne furrowed her brows and glanced at her screen. Her eyes lit up when she spotted the caller ID. "Mr. Queen," she greeted. Jonathan told her apologetically, "Dr. Jarvis, I've investigated the matter. And it was just a misunderstanding. I've dealt with it, so we shall deliver the medicinal herbs you need to the Research Institute tomorrow morning." Hearing that, Roxanne exhaled in relief. She could finally relax at the good news. "Can I ask what happened?" Jonathan fell silent for a few moments. "Well, it's an internal problem within Queen Group, so I can't tell you anything. However, it won't happen again." "Don't worry," he assured. Roxanne didn't ask any more questions and nodded. "Thank you." Jonathan chuckled. "You're welcome. If you need any medicinal herbs urgently, please consider Queen Group first. We promise we'll deliver the medicinal herbs as stipulated on the contract." Roxanne thanked him gratefully. After a brief small talk, the two ended the call. At the same time, someone knocked on Roxanne's door. Colby entered her office. He had waited the entire day but didn't receive any updates from Queen Group. Hence, he got worried and came over to ask Roxanne about the matter. "Dr. Jarvis, did Queen Group give you any update about the matter?" he urged. He noticed the smile flitting across Roxanne's lips right after he asked that question. "They just called and promised to deliver the medicinal herbs first thing tomorrow morning," Roxanne told him cheerfully. Colby had already guessed the answer from her expression. He flashed a grin and said, "I knew Queen Group wouldn't go back on their word." His smile slipped ash-added, "But Queen Group is the only company that is willing to work with us right now. It isn't enough." The Research Institute was expanding quickly, so Queen Group couldn't supply the medicinal herbs they needed fast enough. Roxanne's smile faded. "No matter what, this batch of medicinal herbs can solve our problem for now. Is this not too much on the other hand?" Frida was furious as she assumed her brother and grandfather didn't appreciate her efforts. Consequently, they even forbade her from interfering in Queen Group's business. After Alfred and Jonathan went upstairs, Frida plopped onto the couch angrily and brooded for a long time. She would occasionally vent her frustrations on the servants. As she failed to tamp down her frustration, she called Aubrey. "Aubrey, where are you?" Aubrey was in the hospital, and Sonia was sitting beside her. Hearing Frida's voice, she lowered her phone's volume and responded, "I'm in the hospital." "What's wrong? Haven't you got discharged yet?" Frida asked in concern. Frida knew Aubrey was admitted to the hospital after she got hurt trying to save Sonia. Frida often visited Aubrey at the hospital, but she didn't realize Aubrey's condition was that serious. Aubrey glanced at Sonia and said pretentiously, "I wanted to discharge from the hospital as I think I'm doing better. But Mrs. Farwell is worried about me." Hearing that, Sonia shot her a reproachful look. Aubrey flashed a coy smile as their gazes met. It's only right for Mrs. Farwell to show her concern for you as you got hurt trying to save her. Besides, you're her future daughter-in-law. Who else should she shower her affection on if not for you? Frida answered cheerfully. Recalling what happened earlier, she put on a gloomy expression. I'll come visit you later. Wait for me. Aubrey grunted in agreement. After the call ended, Sonia offered her a slice of orange. Taking the slice of orange from her, Aubrey said, Mrs. Farwell, I've already recovered. You don't have to take care of me. You're making me feel rather uneasy. Sonia shot her a disapproving look. You are injured, so you need to recuperate in the hospital for some time. Why do you feel uneasy if I were to take care of you? You got hurt because of me. I'll feel bad if I don't take care of you. Aubrey's lips curled as she ate the orange obediently. Sonia was pleased by how obedient Aubrey looked. Nodding, she added, after you marry into the Farwell family, we will have a lot of time to care for each other. Aubrey's cheeks turned pink as she gave Sonia a shy look. Mrs. Farwell, Lucian hasn't made up his mind yet. Stop saying that. Lucian will listen to me. Roxanne is getting kicked out of Horrington. Who else can Lucian marry besides you? Sonia said solemnly. Aubrey promptly feigned ignorance. Why would you say that? I've warned all medicinal herbs suppliers in Horrington to stop providing medicinal herbs to Roxanne. If she knows her place, she should know that she isn't welcomed in Horrington. Sonia responded coolly. As Pearson Group WAG, one of the biggest medicinal herb suppliers in Harrington, Aubrey knew that Sonia meant what she said. Despite feeling delighted inwardly, Aubrey protested, Mrs. Farwell, isn't this too much? If the Research Institute discovers that Roxanne is the reason, you don't have to pity her, for she brought this upon herself. How dare she return to Horrington after what she did to us? Sonia patted Aubrey's shoulder to console her. Aubrey pursed her lips and smiled. Who called you? Sonia asked. It was Frida. She will be coming later to pay me a visit later, came Aubrey's answer. Sonia put the stuff she was holding aside and grotto her feet. You have a visitor, so I won't disturb you. Let Roxanne off easily. Not long after Sonia left, someone knocked on the door. Frida then walked in wearing a bitter expression. What's wrong? Did someone bully you? Aubrey questioned as she was confused after seeing her expression. Frida sat beside the bed and started peeling an apple distractedly. My brother and my grandpa, she complained. As Frida wasn't focusing on peeling the apple, Aubrey took the apple and knife away from her. Patiently, she asked, what did they do to you? They found out I was the one who told Rex to not supply the medicinal herbs to Roxanne. Frida shot her an aggrieved look. Actually, it was Aubrey who gave her the idea in the first place. If Aubrey hadn't mentioned the matter, Frida wouldn't find out that Sonia had blacklisted Roxanne. As they both disliked Roxanne, Aubrey suggested that she should grab the opportunity to stop supplying medicinal herbs to Roxanne. Besides getting to vent their frustration, they could also improve the relationship between Queen Group and Farwell Group. Frida didn't think much about it. Assuming that Aubrey was helping her, she did as she was told. After she received a scolding, she immediately came to Aubrey and poured out her grievances. A flash of disgust appeared in Aubrey's eyes. I can't believe Frida couldn't accomplish something this simple. Despite thinking that way, Aubrey had to pretend to be a caring and understanding friend. Then what happened? Did they reprimand you? She urged softly. Frida nodded angrily. They said I was trying to destroy the Queen family's reputation. I was prohibited to interfere in Queen Group's business from now on. Having said that, Frida took Aubrey's other arm and gave her pleading look. Aubrey, you know I did nothing wrong. Please help me explain to Jonathan and my grandpa. I did nothing wrong but lost my voice in Queen Group. It's not worthwhile at all. A flash of impatience appeared on Aubrey's face as she brushed Frida's hand away discreetly. Calm down. It's normal for old Mr. Queen and Jonathan to react that way, for it was Roxanne who cured old Mr. Queen's illness. Jonathan had always stood on Roxanne's side, so it's normal for him to defend her. Frida's expression changed slightly. Are we going to let Roxanne off easily this time? Aubrey grimaced. Did Queen Group resume supplying medicinal herbs to Roxanne's research institute? Frida nodded gravely. Obviously, Jonathan and Grandpa want to continue supplying medicinal herbs to Roxanne. A wave of fury crashed through Frida when she thought of she failed to teach Roxanne a lesson and instead ended up getting reprimanded by her family. Aubrey's rage nearly went through the roof, for that meant that Sonia's plan had fallen short. She didn't want Queen Group to intervene and hinted at Frida to take action against Roxanne. Alas, she didn't know that Frida was that unreliable. Aubrey fell silent, but Frida didn't realize anything was wrong and continued to pour her grievances. I wonder why Grandpa and Jonathan side with Roxanne when all she did was cure Grandpa's illness. They refused to believe me even though I am one of them. I did this for Queen Group's sake, she complained. Aubrey was getting annoyed, so she merely replied half-heartedly, they will soon know that you're right. Hearing her acknowledgement, Frida was pleased. I knew I was right. However, she couldn't help but lament, ugh, we let her off easily this time. Aubrey's eyes were blocks of ice. Smile and says nothing. Frida was rather confused. Could it be that Aubrey has another trick up her sleeve? With that thought in mind, Frida asked carefully. Aubrey, do you mean that you have another way to teach Roxanne a lesson? Ugh, she's so annoying. Even if I have another trick up my sleeve, why would I let her know? She's no help at all. However, Aubrey knew she would still need Frida's help one day. Thus, she assured Frida, don't worry. I won't let that gain the upper hand. She was the reason you got chided by old Mr. Queen and Jonathan. I shall avenge you and make sure she gets what she deserves. In just a few words, Aubrey had placed the blame on Roxanne. Frida nodded vehemently. Since I met her, Grandpa and Jonathan kept finding fault with me. I'm one of them, but they insisted on siding with her. We really need to teach her a lesson. Having achieved her goal, Aubrey squinted her eyes in satisfaction. She patted Frida's shoulder and said, don't forget that we're not the only ones who hate Roxanne. Her words stunned Frida. It took a while for the latter to realize what she meant. Oh, I forgot that it was Sonia who came up with the plan to make things difficult for Roxanne. There's no way Roxanne can get what she wants. It was clear that Sonia wanted to take Roxanne down to help Aubrey. After all, everyone saw how Sonia adored Aubrey all the years. There was no way Sonia would allow Roxanne, who suddenly returned, to take the place belonging to Aubrey. Besides, Roxanne left without saying goodbye 6 years ago and only left behind a divorce agreement. It meant that she had dumped Lucian instead of the other way around. Her action brought shame to the Farwell family. Sonia would never forgive Roxanne ever. The more Frida pondered over the matter, the more excited she got. Her anger disappeared into thin air as she grinned and fawned over Aubrey. Mrs. Farwell adores you, Aubrey. This time, she must have taken action against Roxanne because of you. Aubrey was inwardly delighted, but she put on an act and furrowed her brows. That has nothing to do with me. It was that who has a death wish. Glancing at Aubrey's wounded arm, Frida responded, Roxanne returned to the country a while ago, but Mrs. Farwell didn't take action against her until you got hurt. Do you still think it has nothing to do with you? She only took action as Roxanne caused your arm to get injured twice. Aubrey turned to look at her arm and flashed a smile and said nothing. Indeed, if she hadn't decided to be ruthless toward herself, Sonia might still be tolerating Roxanne's existence. Her injury had forced Sonia to take sides. Frida put on a flattering smile. Mrs. Farwell adores you. Roxanne bullied you, so she must teach Roxanne a lesson. You're her future daughter-in-law, after all. Aubrey's lips twitched. We have to wait for Lucian's decision. Frida couldn't care less. Mrs. Farwell is on your side. After she kicked Roxanne out of Horrington, you'll be the only woman by Lucian's side. Who else can he marry besides you? Just wait patiently for the day to come. You'll be his wife in the near future. She's right. Aubrey's heart swelled with an indescribable sense of happiness at that thought. Why the sudden question? When Roxanne returned home in the evening, Lissa had brought Archie and Benny home and prepared dinner for them. Upon noticing Roxanne from a distance, the two children greeted her, You must be tired, Mommy. They tilted their heads to look at Roxanne and realized she looked worn out. The two boys exchanged glances. Mommy must have had a hard time at work. Roxanne was exhausted after a long day at work, but after seeing how worried her sons were, she pulled herself together. Stroking their heads, she smiled. Thank you, my darlings. When her words fell, Archie and Benny immediately ran to fetch her a pair of slippers and placed them at her feet. Roxanne responded with a grin. When she took off her coat, the two boys grabbed it from her and hung it on the rack. It took them a while as they were not tall enough to reach the coat rack. Roxanne giggled while patiently waiting for the boys. After they managed to hang the coat, she led them to the dining table and sat them down. Bon appétit, Mommy. The two little ones even gave their mother some of their food. Roxanne's smile grew wider. All her exhaustion vanished in a flash when she saw how obedient Archie and Benny were. Mommy, you must be tired, right? Benny leaned over to observe her expression. Roxanne responded with a comforting smile, Not at all, especially seeing your faces. The two boys looked at her with suspicion. Come, try some. Roxanne gave them a portion of her food as well. Just when she thought the little ones would dine in peace, Benny suddenly questioned endearingly, Mommy. When do we get to travel out of the country again? Archie, sitting on the side, shot a glance at Roxanne. Roxanne froze for a moment before answering, I still have work to do at the research institute. We can travel once I complete all my tasks. Does that mean we won't get to travel anytime soon? Benny queried again. Roxanne bobbed her head in response to his question. How long more do we have to wait? Benny refused to give in for some reason, making Roxanne knit her brows. When their gazes met, she noticed his eyes were full of anticipation. Roxanne could not help but feel a pang of guilt. The two boys enjoyed living in Chania, yet they had to relocate from one place to another because of her. However, knowing Sonia was on their backs, Roxanne had no choice but to steel herself and grasp at straws. When she did not reply to them even after some time, the little ones urged her to give them an answer, Mommy. Hearing that, Roxanne came back to her senses and put on a cursory smile. I don't have an answer yet. What's with the question, though? Archie and Benny exchanged glances again. They were disappointed with Roxanne's response. Seeing them like this, Roxanne had no idea what was on their minds. We bumped into Essie in the kindergarten. She came to play with us, but we could tell she wasn't happy, Benny said in a sweet, mellow voice. Looking at Roxanne, he pleaded, Mommy, can we stay a little longer? Roxanne felt a tingling pain in her heart when she thought of Estella. After keeping mum for a moment, she shook her head. We have to leave after I've completed my work here. Don't you miss Professor Lambert? Feeling disappointed, Archie and Benny lowered their heads. Roxanne was at a loss for words upon noticing how downhearted they were. Thankfully, Archie and Benny knew their mother could not bear to leave Estella either. Although they were upset, they eventually regained their composure and continued finishing their dinner, sensibly not uttering another word. By the time Roxanne finished her dinner, she had drained every last bit of her energy. The two boys went upstairs to rest as they were not in the mood to play anymore. Watching them sleep, Roxanne gently stroked their cheeks and whispered, Sorry, darlings. At such a young age, Archie and Benny had to travel from one place to another because of her. By right, these boys deserved a better life. Had she told Lucian the truth, the Farwell family would for sure take them back, and they would be able to enjoy all the privileges. Yet, Roxanne chose to keep them by her side. She had worked hard over the years to make it up to the boys. But it seemed what she did was far from enough. After watching them sleep for a while, Roxanne leaned forward and gave them a peck on their foreheads. She then stood up, turned off the lights, and left the room. When they heard the sound of the closing door, Archie and Benny gradually opened their eyes and exchanged looks. They heard Roxanne's apology because they had been awake all along. Why did Mommy apologize to us? Did she do anything bad to us? Returning to her room, Roxanne packed her things for a while before lying on her bed. As she had a long day at work, she thought she would fall deep into slumber in no time, but the moment she shut her eyes, all sorts of images kept popping up in her mind. She recalled how Sonia confronted her in the cafe, how Estella cried while pleading with her to stay, and the disappointment on Archie's and Benny's faces. Roxanne felt helpless. My life is nothing but a joke. After working hard for so many years, she thought she had garnered enough strength to face the Farwell family. But that was not the case. To the Farwells, she was just another small fry. Once again, she had to leave the city because of the Farwell family. Because after what seemed like a long time, Roxanne finally fell asleep. When the alarm rang the next day, Roxanne woke up with a headache. However, upon remembering Queen Group would deliver the herb today, she forced herself to crawl out of bed. Even when she was freshening up in the bathroom, she was still very much in a daze. By the time she got downstairs, Archie and Benny were already having their breakfast by the table. When the two boys saw their mother coming down the stairs, they remembered how she had apologized to them last night. Even so, they believed Roxanne apologized to them when they were asleep because no, so they decided not to pursue the matter. Looking at her face, they expressed their concern. "Did you not sleep well, Mo?" That question took Roxanne by surprise. "You have dark circles under your eyes," Archie added with a serious look, as upon hearing that, Roxanne immediately understood what they were implying. Plastering a smile on her face, "Had too much coffee at work yesterday." "Thanks for your concern, darlings." The two boys looked at each other, skeptical about her answer. After asking after breakfast, Roxanne requested Lisa's help to send them to the kindergarten during the drive to the research institute. She could help but feel a tad anxious Jonathan might have given her his promise. But somehow, she still felt insecure based on her experience with the other business associates. Problems always occurred during the delivery. Had to tell her the truth. Roxanne arrived at the research institute's entrance and saw Colby doing a check on the herb. Standing beside him was a plump man in a suit. She had no idea what their conversation was about, but could tell Colby was annoyed by the man who tried to please him. Roxanne rarely saw such an expression on Colby, as he had always been a patient gentleman. Quickening her steps, she walked up to them. "Dr. Galloway, I didn't do this on purpose. I was in a meeting when you called me yesterday, and I thought I'd pee before the man could finish his sentence." Colby interrupted him indifferently when he saw Roxanne coming in his direction. He then introduced Roxanne to the man. "This is Dr. Roxanne Jarvis, the person in charge of our research institute. Please tell her what you told me just now." The man froze for a moment and immediately tilted his head to look at Roxanne. He then greeted her with respect. "Dr. Jarvis, I'm Rex Tanner, the manager in charge of the herb from Queen Group. You can call me Rex." Roxanne looked confused. "This man is from Queen Group? What's going on?" Words caught in Rex's throat as he did not know how to explain the situation to Roxanne. Truthfully, Rex was a victim of the incident. He only gave Colby an attitude because Frida told him that was Jonathan's idea. Now, he had no choice but to bear the consequences. When Jonathan ordered him to apologize to people in the research institute, he thought he should beg for their forgiveness in person instead of making a call. That was why he came here with his entourage. Never did Rex think they would give him the cold shoulder. He tried buttering Colby up, yet the latter ignored him. "But I can't come clean and tell them the instruction came from Ms. Queen, can I?" Niece when he found out Roxanne was the person in charge of the research institute. He even further humbled himself before her, as he knew she was the same person who cured Alfred. After exchanging glances with Colby for a moment, Roxanne looked at Rex and nodded at him in response. "What brings you here, Mr. Tanner?" she queried. Roxanne believed the man standing in front of her was the man who did not bother to entertain Colby over the phone. No wonder Colby gives him attitude today. Upon hearing the tone of Roxanne's voice, he could not help but sigh before saying apologetically, "Dr. Jarvis, Dr. Galloway called me yesterday, but I was in an urgent meeting when I thought of returning his call after the meeting. Mr. Queen called me to his office. I got caught up with work and eventually forgot to get back to Dr. Galloway. And that's how the misunderstanding started." Roxanne's lips curled into a cold smile. "In other words, you're blaming us for being impatient? Are you trying to say we should have waited for your call, Mr. Tanner?" Cold sweat began beading on Rex's forehead. He thought talking to Roxanne would be easier than communicating with Colby. "That's not what I meant." The woman was petite but exuded a domineering aura. Rex broke out in cold ni. Roxanne glared at him for a few seconds before reaching out her hand. Dialing. At the end of the day, the man was from Queen Group. Since Jonathan had left the matter to that man's hand, that meant he was also one of Jonathan's men. Therefore, Roxanne was not going to put him in a tough spot. What she said earlier was merely a reminder for him that the research institute was not easy to deal with and for him to put in more effort into the matter in the future. Coming back to his sense, Rex let out a loud sigh of relief. He then quickly held Roxanne's hand, nodding vigorously. Of course, of course." Roxanne flashed him a polite smile. "I look forward to working with you, then." Rex wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and agreed to her words fervently. On the other side, Colby was done with counting the herbs. He then asked the employees to move the boxes in before he walked over to the other two people. Clearly, Rex had done similar jobs before, for he quickly handed Colby the document when he saw the other man approaching them. Colby glanced at Roxanne. Technically, the person in charge should be the one signing it. Nevertheless, Roxanne inclined her head at Colby. After a moment of hesitation, Colby took the document and signed it. However, long after he signed the document, Rex did not take it back. It seemed as if the latter was lost in his thoughts. The corner of Colby's lips twitched before he noncommittally urged, "Mr. Tanner." Hearing him, Rex snapped back to his senses and awkwardly took back the document. He then poured another round of apologies before Roxanne used her work as an excuse for him to leave. After watching the people from Queen Group leave, the two turned and went back into the research institute. "Will this batch of herbs be enough?" Roxanne asked seriously. Colby was walking behind her when he heard her. He then nodded. "Maybe Queen Group is trying to compensate us for how Rex rejected us yesterday because they've given us a little more herbs than we've ordered. We'll have enough for this period of time. In fact, we might have a little more than enough." Hearing that, Roxanne furrowed her brows. "Why didn't you say anything about that just now?" Colby arched a brow in response. "I wanted to, but I saw that the list stated the same amount as the amount I've calculated, so I didn't raise the issue. If he were to mention it around Rex, Rex would certainly take the opportunity to brush over his rejection the day before. There was no way Colby would give him the chance to do that." Knowing what he was thinking about, Roxanne singled. Even so, she knew it was Jonathan's doing. She could avoid mentioning it around Rex, but the moment Roxanne returned to her office, she called Jonathan. Jonathan picked up the call quickly. In fact, he even started speaking before Roxanne chuckled. "I have. Your company's people came earlier than I did." Jonathan did not disagree with that. What happened yesterday must have been having Rex send the research institute more herbs than ordered was partially a selfish wish of Jonathan. He hoped it would salvage Queen Group's reputation among Roxanne, and the Roxanne did not reject Jonathan as she knew that the extra herbs were but that sounds like a good idea. Jonathan chuckled. "My grandpa has been as." After a brief small talk, the two ended the call. After Roxanne put her phone to the side, she proceeded to read the details about the Research Institute's recent use of herbs, and her head throbbed. To be honest, she had already planned it all the night before. She was going to ask for a favor from Jonathan to introduce her to a few herb suppliers. However, Queen Group had given them benefits earlier in the day. If Roxanne asked for another favor, it would seem as if she was greedy. As a matter of fact, she hesitated for a long while earlier in the call and ended up not saying anything about that to Jonathan. Thus, she had no choice but to contact her seniors who she had met at the medical conference the other time. Roxanne wondered if they still remembered her. As the day before had been tiring, and as she had not gotten a good night's sleep the night before as well, Roxanne could not help but feel frustrated as she scrolled through her contact list. Everything had been going smoothly at the Research Institute, and they had even completed several major projects under her lead. However, in the blink of an eye, they had returned to step one. In fact, the situation was even worse than back then. That was all thanks to Sonia. At that, Roxanne could not help but feel fury. "I didn't do anything wrong, so why won't Sonia just let me go?" The intensity of that fury rose to its peak after Roxanne failed to get anyone to pick up the calls. Furrowing her brows, she weakly massaged her temples. Once again, she was forced to acknowledge how weak and helpless she was. Meanwhile, Frida felt that she had been wronged. It was one thing for Alfred to berate her, but the elderly man even took back her power in Queen Group. Even though Frida had complained to Aubrey about it, the more Frida ruminated about the matter, the angrier she became. In the end, she barely slept that night. The next morning after breakfast, Frida rushed to Queen Group. She dared not voice her protests to Alfred, but she certainly dared to convince her brother otherwise. Just as Jonathan ended Roxanne's call, he heard a commotion outside. "Miss Queen, Mr. Queen is currently working. If you don't have an appointment, what is she doing here?" Jonathan rose to his feet as his head ached. Opening the office door, he said to his assistant, "You can leave first then." He frowned at his sister before turning to walk back into his office in silence. Frida hurried after him. Upon entering his office, she sat down on the couch and began scanning the area. Even though Jonathan had chided her the day before, he still doted on his sis. Smiling, Frida took the cup of coffee from him before huffing. "Why can't I see?" Jonathan replied in exasperation, "You were never this early." Even when you at those words, Frida fell awkwardly silent for a while. She then sipped on. He faked nonchalance to hide her guilty feelings. Jonathan could read what was on her mind, but he said nothing out loud. Instead, he stood up and grabbed. Beat later, Frida squeezed out. "Jonathan, Can you talk to Grandpa on my behalf and ask him to let me stay in Queen group?" Just as she said that, Jonathan paused in his reading and grimaced. "Give me," surge of upset rose in Frida when she saw the grimness of her brother's ex. "I've already humbled myself, but he's still acting like this. It's as if I've done so. Do you still think you've done nothing wrong?" Jonathan could figure out what she was thinking with just one glance. With a cold look, he put down the documents in his hands and gravely looked at the young woman in front of him. Frida frowned. "I didn't do anything wrong. The one targeting Roxanne was Mrs. Farwell, not me. I was just working on her instructions. Mrs. Farwell told you herself not to supply any herbs to Dr. Jarvis Research Institute." Jonathan sternly questioned, causing Frida to jump in fright. She tensed for a second, but she was quick to relax again. Then, she steeled herself and replied, "Even if Mrs. Farwell didn't tell me that, I know what she wants. Furthermore, we're in a good relationship with Farwell Group. Shouldn't we help Mrs. Farwell?" Before Jonathan could speak, Frida continued. "Jonathan, remember that Roxanne left without a word, she only left behind divorce papers. Mrs. Farwell hasn't settled the score with her yet. Aren't we, the people who know what happened, stand on the same side as the Farwells? You should be avenging Lucian with how close you are to him." Jonathan returned the question to her in a cold tone. "Did Lucian tell you this? Does Lucian need either you or me to avenge him?" As far as Jonathan knew, not only did Lucian not need them to avenge him, but he was even defending Roxanne even more than others. Therefore, how could Lucian possibly let them target Roxanne? With that in mind, Jonathan began thinking about how Lucian might not know that Sonia was targeting Roxanne. Otherwise, there was no way Lucian would not do anything until now. Meanwhile, Frida was still going on with her excuses. Regardless of everything, what Roxanne did back then was a fact. Mrs. Farwell would never forgive her, and Aubrey stop. Jonathan sternly interrupted her upon returning to his senses. "You know well whether you're doing this for Mrs. Farwell or for yourself. Frida Queen, ask yourself this: what has Dr. Jarvis done wrong to our family? If not for her, Grandpa wouldn't even have recovered so well. She's the Queen family's savior. It's one thing for you to target her verbally, but you still refuse to admit that you've done wrong even after doing something ludicrous like this." It was the first time Frida had seen her brother so livid, and for a while, she was frightened into silence. Jonathan then knitted his brows. "I don't know where your prejudice against Dr. Jarvis came from, but from now on, I don't want to hear you doing foolish things like these anymore, let alone hear you using Farwell Group as your excuse." It was then Frida recollected herself and parted her lips to defend herself. "But you still refuse to admit that you've done wrong even after doing something ludicrous like this." It was the first time Frida had seen her brother so livid, and for a while, she was frightened into silence. Jonathan then knitted his brows. "I don't know where your prejudice against Dr. Jarvis came from, but from now on, I don't want to hear you doing foolish things like these anymore, let alone hear you using Farwell Group as your excuse." It was then Frida recollected herself and parted her lips to defend herself. However, before she could say anything, the man in front of her stood up and returned to his seat behind his desk. "You can go back if you have nothing else to say. I have work to do." Also, it's best that why discipline. Jonathan knew that he would not be able to convince her to change. With that said, he threw himself into his work and did not spare another glance. Even so, Frida was reluctant to give in. The speculation Jonathan made in the morning plagued his mind for the entire day. When he went off work at night, he called Lucian. The man on the other end of the line was swift to answer the call. "Is something the matter, Jonathan?" Jonathan briefly chuckled. "It's been a while since we met. Are you free tonight for a drink?" Lucian creased his forehead when he heard that he knew Jonathan had something to say to him, so he lowered his voice and agreed to it. After ending the call, Lucian instructed Caden to pick Estella up from the kindergarten before he drove to a private club he frequented. Just as he entered the establishment, the server came over. "Mr. Farwell, Mr. Queen has been waiting for you." Lucian nodded slightly and followed the server upstairs into a private room. Even though Jonathan had invited Lucian out for a drink, there was only a bottle of beer on the table. The rest that was on the table were plates of delectable dishes. Jonathan was lost in his thoughts on the couch. When he saw Lucian entering the room, he slowly straightened up and smiled. "I wanted to buy you a drink, but today's a busy day. And I haven't gotten to eat yet, so it's mealtime instead." Nodding, Lucian asked the server to leave. When she saw that he was no longer yet, he did not raise his head to look at her even after a while. Scoffing in annoyance, Frida grabbed her bag and rose to her feet. Jonathan only briefly furrowed his brows at the loud noise before continuing. In seconds, only the two of them were left in the room. Taking a seat beside Jonathan, Lucian asked, "Did something happen? Speak your mind." However, Jonathan was stumped. He remembered the way Lucian treated Roxanne. But he had forgotten that it had been a while since he saw the two people interact. In other words, he did not know if their relationship had changed after a while. If things were the same as what his sister told him, if Lucian was silently agreeing to it as well, would his current actions be pointless? However, by the time he came to those thoughts, he had already made the call to Lucian. Thus, he had no choice but to attend the appointment. While he was waiting for Lucian, Jonathan had been mulling over that matter. He was unsure if he should talk to Lucian about it. Hence, Jonathan's mind felt even more muddled when he heard Lucian's question. Left without a choice, he decided to play a fool and nonchalantly took some of the food with his fork before exclaiming, "I haven't eaten the whole day, and I'm starving. Let's dig in first and chat after." Upon seeing Jonathan's abrupt actions, Lucian only deepened his frown. Giving him a forkful of the food, Jonathan chirped, "Lucian, I don't think you've eaten yet too, right? Hurry and try this." The man beside him was silent for a long while. At that, Jonathan could not help but feel remorseful. I shouldn't have called him so quickly. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't be making myself suffer in this way now. After a moment of silence, Lucian decided not to continue the topic and ate with Jonathan. While they dug in, Jonathan would occasionally talk about business matters in an attempt to divert Lucian's attention. However, the more he tried to do that, the more Lucian could sense that something was amiss with Jonathan. Just as they were done with their meal, and right as Jonathan was trying to find an excuse to leave, he heard Lucian speak up. "You haven't talked about the reason you've invited me here. What is it that you're having so much difficulty saying?" Jonathan stiffened before forcing himself to sit back on the couch. After a while of contemplation, he tentatively uttered, "I just wanted to ask if you've been in contact with Ms. Jarvis recently." "Ms. Jarvis? As in Roxanne Jarvis?" Lucian frowned upon hearing his question. He had not contacted that woman since their meeting at the cafe. The last time he heard anything about Roxanne was when Estella said that Aro was planning to move abroad. At that thought, the temperature around Lucian dropped. In the meantime, Caden was just done cleaning up and had just laid down on the bed when he heard his phone ring. It was the ringtone he had set for LU for you. Find out who has been contacting the major herb suppliers in Harrington under who is the one who isn't letting Harrington's herb suppliers work with VR Research Institute, Lucian instructed. Caden hastily agreed to work on that. After the call ended, confusion belatedly crashed into Caden. Although Farwell Group had various kinds of businesses, they did not venture to look into this. Why is someone from Farwell Group contacting herb supplied? Despite the strangeness of the situation, Caden still worked on it right away. After all, it was something concerning Farwell Group, and Caden was Lucian not long after he found out what had happened. Again, Caden was taken aback. Isn't VR Research Institute Ms. Jarvis Research Institute? Moreover, the person out to be Mrs. Farwell? The atmosphere in the room turned tense. Jonathan discreetly shuddered and pondered if he should continue. "Why are you asking about that?" Lucian glanced at him. Jonathan cleared his throat before replying with as much nonchalance as he could muster. "When she came to give Grandpa a check-up yesterday, I suddenly recalled that you were on good terms with her, so I wanted to ask you about it. If you rarely talk to her, then I'm not going to bother myself with the matter anymore." Before Jonathan could finish his sentence, the other man's eyes darkened. Jonathan was certain that Lucian would decipher what was going on soon. Hence, he halted and gave Lucian a confused look. "What's the matter, Lucian? Do you want to court her?" Lucian's brows were tightly knitted, and Jonathan could see the traces of annoyance in them. His question rendered Jonathan dumbfounded and speechless. What have I said to make him think this way? Indeed, Roxanne was a nice woman, but Jonathan knew well about her relationship with Lucian. Even though that relationship was now in the past, he was still not going to do something that would make him an unloyal friend. Furthermore, Roxanne's rejection when Alfred tried to make them had been obvious. How could he possibly shamelessly court her still? Nevertheless, Lucian was gloomily looking at his friend as a myriad of thoughts flashed through his mind. As far as he knew, even though Roxanne infuriated him a lot, she was quite the charming woman in many ways. Therefore, it was not surprising for his friend to be interested in her. Moreover, with the way Jonathan had been acting the entire time, he had been hesitant to speak ever since Lucian entered the room, so evidently Jonathan thought of the matter as a tough topic. That was why Lucian had figured out what Jonathan was going to talk about the moment Jonathan mentioned Roxanne. Nevertheless, the fury that came out of nowhere began simmering in him at the thought of that possibility. And it made the temperature around him drop. A tense silence ensued. It took Jonathan a while before he could recollect himself after Lucian's shocking question. Then, he quickly waved his hands to deny it. "Why would you think that? I just noticed that Dr. Jarvis has lost much weight, and since you were so protective of her back then, I wanted to ask if the two of you have." With that, Jonathan tentatively looked at Lucian and cautiously separated his hands as a gesture of breaking up. In other words, he was asking Lucian if the latter was no longer interested in Roxanne. An hearing that made Lucian's expression turn colder. "I was protective of her." Jonathan nodded in affirmation. "I could see it when Dr. Jarvis was treating my." Lucian curled his lips mockingly. To outsiders, he was exceptionally protective of Roxanne. Yet, who would have guessed that Roxanne would avoid him and even flee over the moment Jonathan sensed the change in Lucian's demeanor. His head ached. He could not say that Lucian had nothing to do with that Lucian was still concerned about Roxanne. Yet, despite all that he had saw at the same time, Jonathan could not say that Lucian cared not for Roxanne. So should I talk about that matter with him? A beat later, Jonathan took in a deep breath and steeled himself before asking, "So, how are things between the two of you? If you're not planning to get involved with her anymore, I'll think of her as just a normal doctor the next time she gives my grandpa a checkup, and I won't be as courteous anymore." Seconds later, Lucian uttered, "Just treat her the same as you always do. She's going to be overseas soon, anyway, she's not going to have many chances to give old Mr. Queen check UPS anymore." Hearing that, Jonathan let out a relieved sigh quietly because his words meant that Lucian was still interested in Roxanne. After learning that, Jonathan began trying to steer the topic toward what troubles Roxanne had been encountering the past few days. Ahem. "Also, when Dr. Jarvis came to give my grandpa a checkup yesterday, she mentioned their research institute has encountered some troubles again." Jonathan started, trying to keep the change in the topic as smooth as possible. Just as those words were out of his mouth, Lucian turned to look at him. "What happened?" Jonathan explained, "Dr. Jarvis came to treat my grandpa because all the herb suppliers in Horrington refused to work with their research institute. That's why she came to the Queen family to get a contract that would be announced to the public about us selling herbs to their research institute at half price. After that, she succeeded in treating my grandpa, so I signed the contract with her as promised." With Queen Group as the pioneer, most of the herb suppliers began collaborating with the research institute again. However, for the past few days, Jonathan trailed off and glanced at his friend's expression. It was then he saw the frown on Lucian's face. A pause later, Jonathan continued, "The same thing happened again. All the herb suppliers in Horrington have received a notice that warned them against working with Dr. Jarvis Research Institute. So, the only business partner that Dr. Jarvis has left is Queen Group." Wrath appeared on Lucian's face. "Who did this?" Jonathan kept quiet for a while before deciding not to give Lucian the answer right away. Instead, he parted Lucian's shoulders and replied mysteriously, "This is all I can tell you. I'm sure that looking into this matter is no difficult feat for you, so it's best that you look into this yourself." Regardless of everything, Sonia was an elder to him. Moreover, this was, at the end of the day, Lucian's family matter. If he continued, he would be crossing the line. Jonathan thought that Lucian would look into the matter the next day at work or when they separated their ways later. To his surprise, though, just as he was done telling Lucian about it, the latter ignored the fact that Jonathan was still right beside him and instantly took out his phone to make a call. In the meantime, Caden was just done cleaning up and had just laid down on the bed when he heard his phone ring. It was the ringtone he had set for Lucian, so Caden instantly shot upright and picked up the call. "Mr. Farwell, what can I do for you? Find out who has been contacting the major herb suppliers in Harrington under Farwell Group's name and who is the one who isn't letting Harrington's herb suppliers work with VR Research Institute," Lucian instructed. Caden hastily agreed to work on that. After the call ended, confusion belatedly crashed into Caden. Although Farwell Group had various kinds of businesses, they did not venture to look into this. Why is someone from Farwell Group contacting herb supplied? Despite the strangeness of the situation, Caden still worked on it right away. After all, it was something concerning Farwell Group, and Caden was Lucian. Not long after, he found out what had happened. Again, Caden was taken aback. Isn't VR Research Institute Ms. Jarvis Research Institute? Moreover, the person out to be Mrs. Farwell? Caden took quite some time before he could reel in from the shock. The first thing he did after that was to report to Lucian. Meanwhile, Lucian did not speak after ending the call with Caden. Jonathan was no fool, so he quietly ate the food that had turned cold. When Lucian's phone lit up again, Jonathan whipped his head toward it. Lucian answered the call swiftly. "Mr. Farwell, I have the findings," Caden started cautiously. "Who did this?" Lucian asked in a deep voice. Caden hesitantly replied, "It's Mrs. Farwell." Lucian lowered his gaze when he heard that, but no surprise crossed his face. Ever since Jonathan told him about the matter, he could somewhat guess who was behind it. Instructing Caden to look into it was just to make sure his speculation was right. "Understood." Lucian then expressionlessly ended the call. The temperature in the room had almost dropped below zero by then. Jonathan opened his mouth to say something, but Lucian's voice came first. "When did you find out about this?" Jonathan tensed for a moment before answering honestly, "Yesterday." Just as he replied to Lucian, the temperature in the room dropped even more. Jonathan quickly explained, "Queen Group was affected too, so I was busy dealing with Queen Group's trouble. Also, I didn't know how I should tell you about it, so it dragged on until today. Don't worry. The herbs Queen Group supplied to Dr. Jarvis and the others should be enough." Lucian lowered his gaze, suppressing the upset feelings. After all, he was ultimately at fault for something like this to happen. He knew that his mother disliked Roxanne, and he had seen the two's confrontation in the cafe himself. He should have realized that his mother would have laid a finger on Roxanne. He should have sent men to keep a close eye on both of them to stop his mother from doing anything and to protect Roxanne. However, Lucian had been too busy with his company. Whenever he came back from his office, he would stay at Estella's side at all times, resulting in him neglecting Roxanne. Furthermore, he never expected his mother to have made a move so quickly. "Also, I didn't know you had no idea about this," Jonathan slowly added. He thought that Lucian would somewhat know about that since Sonia had done it by using Farwell Group's power. If not for Frida's words earlier in the morning, Jonathan would have never. Though at that, Lucian's expression darkened even more. That woman must have known that this has something to do with Farwell Group. Maybe she thinks that I know about this as well. She's already avoiding me before this. Now, I wonder what I've been busy in the company, was the simple answer Lucian gave to Jonathan. The latter nodded in understanding. True. Mrs. Farwell would have hidden this with that thought in mind. Jonathan could not help but feel apologetic. I should have told you abo. There was no change in Lucian's expression as he said. Only the two of us. If Lucian were to put himself in Jonathan's shoes, he would be able to understand their families were on good terms. By telling Lucian about it, Jonathan drew his brows together. That's not the point. If not for seeing they. Still, what are you going to do now that you've learned about this? Jonathan hesitantly asked as he curiously stared at Lucian. Jonathan was certain that his friend was interested in Roxanne. However, whether or not Lucian was going to stand up against Sonia for Roxanne was something Jonathan was unsure about. Lucian frowned as frustration washed over him. A beat later, he finally uttered, I'll think of a way to deal with Farwell Group. Will you be able to assist with Roxanne's side? Jonathan was baffled to hear that. Think of a way? What does that even mean? Is he going to go up against Mrs. Farwell or not? When Lucian heard no response from Jonathan, he added, It's fine if it's inconvenient for you. I'll think of a way myself. For now, I can't go up against my mother in public. With the kind of person his mother was, the more he went up against her for Roxanne, the more irked his mother would be with Roxanne, and the more she would target Roxanne. Furthermore, regardless of everything, she was his mother. Lucian had to be more or less considerate of her status. Jonathan belatedly came back to his senses at that. After a moment of rumination, he voiced, I'll definitely help out. Currently, only Queen Group is working with Dr. Jarvis Research Institute. Although I can make sure that they get the herbs they need for now, I won't be able to do this long term. Dr. Jarvis will need to work with more herb suppliers, and with Queen Group's influence in Horrington, it won't be too difficult for me to convince several herb suppliers to do so. However, he trailed off, giving Lucian a long look. Seeing that, Lucian knitted his brows even more. What's the matter? Things will go far smoother if you back me up, Jonathan responded as he arched a brow. I'll just be looking for a few better herb suppliers. No one will say a word to Mrs. Farwell. Lucian inclined his head. Thank you, then. Also, if it's possible, try to keep her in the country. Lucian knew Roxanne well. He knew she would not just leave the research institute to rot and head overseas. If Jonathan was going to help out, Roxanne would certainly do her best to work with him. No problem. Only after agreeing to it did Jonathan realize what Lucian had just said, and he knitted his brows in shock. Wait. What do you mean? Dr. Jarvis is going overseas? She isn't planning to stay in the country. Lucian nodded. Jonathan was still in disbelief. How did you know about that? I thought as far as Jonathan knew, Roxanne had stayed abroad for 6 years, and she was back. Could not believe that she would leave so easily. Lucian's lips curled into a mocking smile. It's the truth. Not a misunderstanding. He, too, had been stupefied upon learning about it, but that was the reality he then knew. Jonathan cast Lucian a hesitant look. What is Lucian going to do if Dr. Jarvis leaves the country? Lucian gave him a dark look. That's why I'm asking you to try to keep her in the country. At that, Jonathan snapped back to his senses and let out a sigh inwardly. However, Jonathan had been harboring a thought ever since he learned that Roxanne was Lucian's ex-wife who had left without a word, and he could not help but ask it at that moment. What relationship does Dr. Jarvis have with Essie? I've never seen Essie so reliant on anyone. Even though Jonathan did not say it out loud, Lucian could guess what Jonathan was trying to ask. Hence, he mildly replied, Essie's her daughter. Jonathan had long guessed that, but hearing it from Lucian was another matter. A while to come back to his senses after hearing Lucian's response. The time Roxanne left and Estella's age, along with how close Estella was with Roxanne, made Jonathan suspect that Estella was Roxanne's daughter. However, it seemed Roxanne treated Estella like any ordinary child whenever they interacted, so Jonathan dared not jump to any conclusions about that. Thus, he was perplexed to hear Lucian's confession. So Dr. Jarvis doesn't know about this? She gave birth to the girl, but she has no idea about that? Jonathan simply could not wrap his head around the matter, so he hesitantly asked. Dr. Jarvis doesn't know about this, does? Lucian nodded in affirmation. It seems like something has happened midway. So both Essie and Roxanne don't know about this. The more Jonathan thought about it, the more absurd he found it to be. Why don't you tell them both then? If Dr. Jarvis finds out that Essie's her daughter, she might choose to marry Lucian again for the sake of Essie. Things won't be this complicated. At his question, Lucian's gaze darkened. It's because she has 2 sons. Because initially, it was because of her 2 boys and also because he thought Roxanne knew that Estella was her daughter. Later on, he realized there had been a misunderstanding, but there was no opportunity for him to explain it anymore. Now, Roxanne was avoiding him. If he were to tell her about this, he was certain that he would only be troubling her even more. Jonathan knew that Roxanne had 2 children, but he had never seen them himself. Hence, he only muttered. We don't know what Dr. Jarvis has gone through all these years. Honestly, I'm curious about where her kids are from. Lucian lowered his gaze in silence. The children's history was still a mystery to him. At Lucian's silence, Jonathan realized that his friend did not want to continue the topic anymore. Furthermore, he had wrecked everything. Dr. Jarvis is Essie's biological mother. I definitely have to help out. Lucian's tense expression relaxed a little. And he nodded at Jonathan. Jonathan smiled. If you want to thank me, you'll have to treat me to this meal. Smiling in return, Lucian agreed to it. It was getting late, and since the 2 were done discussing the main topic, they stood to leave. The next morning, Roxanne was in the research institute, troubled by the issue of business partners. She had contacted everyone she could in the country in the past few days, but her efforts were to no avail. Many did not have a wide network of connections in Horrington. Even if they did, they were not going to fight against Farwell Group for her. 3 days after, Roxanne was lost. Right as she was in the middle of despairing, someone knocked on her office door. Colby entered with Jonathan behind him. Dr. Jarvis, Mr. Queen has come, Colby informed her. Hearing that, Roxanne raised her head in shock. When she saw the man behind Colby, she was momentarily taken aback. Queen Group's herbs have already been delivered, so what is he doing here? Dr. Jarvis. Jonathan smiled at her before scanning her office. He wanted to take the opportunity to find a photo of the children's father, but he only found a photo of Roxanne and the two boys on her desk. Jonathan then looked back at her and sat down opposite her. Colby already knew why Jonathan was there, so he also sat down on the couch without any hesitation. "Mr. Queen, did something happen?" Roxanne held her breath, worried that Jonathan was going to follow Queen Group's wishes. When they arrived downstairs, the server came up to them to inquire about the server glanced at Lucian and saw the man nod. Then, the server bowed. Even after returning to the Queen residence, Jonathan still remembered his P and were under Queen Group's protection that night. After he offered them benefits while also threatening them, they agreed to consider working with VR Research Institute. Noticing her worries, Jonathan flashed her a reassuring smile. "Here's what happened. My grandpa chided me again after I went home yesterday. He told me that my compensation to you still isn't enough, so last night, I've been thinking about what else I can do for you." Upon hearing him, Roxanne stiffened. Nevertheless, Jonathan continued. "I'm in the medical industry too, so I know how much herbs the Research Institute would use. Queen Group's supply will only be of help for a short period of time, and our group's supply alone would not be enough for your work." At that, Roxanne frowned and helplessly said, "You're right. I've also been seeking collaboration with other herb suppliers these few days, but I've been unable to find anyone for that. Mr. Queen, it seems like you have a plan." Jonathan bobbed his head. "I'll be honest with you. Although Queen Group isn't as powerful as Farwell Group in Horrington, we're still quite influential in the medical industry. Many herb suppliers in Horrington have received Queen Group's help when they were just starting out. So these companies would more or less consider a collaboration with your establishment as long as I raise the topic with them." Roxanne's heart skipped a beat at that, but she still hesitantly uttered. "Isn't the?" Roxanne was grateful for Jonathan to offer her a helping hand in the matter, if Sonia were to find out that Jonathan helped her out. And if their family's relationship turned tense because not know how she could make it up to Jonathan. However, Jonathan gave her a nonchalant smile. "Naturally, I've thought about scale businesses in Horrington. Moreover, trust me when I say that Farwell GRO with Lucian backing him up, even if Sonia did find out about something, it was however." Jonathan could see that Roxanne was worried, and he could decipher what she was worried about, so he rephrased his words. "Queen Group won't have a falling out with Farwell Group because of something trivial as this, and I won't risk Queen Group either. Naturally, I've made all the preparations before coming here to talk about this with you." The hesitance on Roxanne's face slowly faded away as she stared at his confident expression. However, she still could not stop herself from asking, "But why are you helping me out? Is it just because I cured old Mr. Queen's illness?" When Jonathan thought about his conversation with Lucian the night before, the thoughts he had whilst he looked into Roxanne's eyes changed. However, Roxanne only felt strange as she stared back at him. Half a beat later, Jonathan slowly stated, "My grandpa had been bedbound for years, and it's all thanks to you, Dr. Jarvis, that he can recover to this point. Moreover, you've said before that my grandpa was already on the verge of death when you took over his case. Therefore, you're his savior. This is a great favor you've done to the Queen family, and my grandpa even thinks of you as one of the Queen's." He has asked me to be extra considerate with you. Roxanne was suddenly reminded of the way Alfred tried to match-make her and Jonathan. Hence, upon hearing Jonathan's words, she began wondering if Alfred had yet to give up on that. An apologetic look then crossed her face as she solemnly told Jonathan, "Please thank old Mr. Queen for me. It's my duty as a doctor to treat and save patients. Also, it's not as if I've not received anything in return, the Queen family has paid for my service, so we don't owe each other anything. Old Mr. Queen has no need to keep this matter in mind anymore." Senny, after a few seconds of silence, Roxanne continued in a grave voice, "Moreover, I already have 2 children. I've already given my clear rejection about the thing old Mr. Queen mentioned last time." Roxanne did not know that Lucian was involved. Thus, she was still no one knew better than Roxanne the hostility Sonia had toward her. She was already glad that Queen Group was continuing with their contract, as she did not want to drag Queen Group into the mess. "I'm sure you don't agree to it either." Right as those words were out of her mouth, the expressions of the 2 other people in the room changed. An exasperated look appeared on Jonathan's face. "Is it that easy to misunderstand my words? Even Lucian misunderstood my words when I talked about this with him last night. Now, Roxanne's doing the same." In contrast, Colby's heart sunk, and his eyes widened. He knew that Roxanne had gotten closer to Jonathan after Roxanne treated Jonathan's grandfather. However, he had no idea that Alfred had borne such thoughts before. Even though Roxanne had not voiced it out loudly, Colby could guess that Alfred with Jonathan. It took Jonathan a while before he could dismiss the exasperation he felt. "Amu Roxanne, it has nothing to do with that. You've already rejected him, so how after we learned about your personality?" Finally, Roxanne sighed in relief and smiled at him. "In that case, I'll have to go." Jonathan had an equally bright smile on his face. "Good to hear that." For that the 2 then chatted a little more about the herb suppliers before Jonathan. Roxanne meant it when she said she would treat Jonathan to a meal. That very night itself, she booked a room at a restaurant and sent him a message to inform him. Jonathan agreed to meet her on the weekend. He then sent Lucian a message and asked if he would be joining them. In any case, the meal was a gesture of appreciation from Roxanne. Since Lucian also lent a hand, it was only right that he attended the dinner. On Lucian's end, he frowned and hesitated when he saw Jonathan's message. If he made an appearance, Roxanne might make a run for it. Just as he was pondering on it, Jonathan sent another message, "Dr. Jarvis is giving me a treat to thank me. Although she isn't aware that you have helped, I don't see why you can't enjoy a treat from her too." As Lucian read the message, his gaze darkened as he replied after a long while, "Let's go together then." Jonathan raised his brows when he saw the reply. He could not wait to see what might happen during the weekend. Judging from the way Roxanne and Lucian behaved, they must have had some kind of conflict. Furthermore, with Sonia getting in between them, their relationship must have been difficult of late. He wondered what might happen when they actually met each other that weekend for dinner. The night of the dinner came, and Roxanne arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes earlier. Just as she entered the private room, she saw 2 men sitting in there. Jonathan was talking to Lucian. When they heard her enter, both men turned and looked in her direction. Getting to his feet, Jonathan greeted with a smile, "Dr. Jarvis." Roxanne nodded in acknowledgement. However, she started panicking when she saw the man sitting next to Jonathan. CXI in that instant, all she wanted was to leave. Then again, it would make her look awkward. Roxanne stood at the door and did not know what to do. On the other end, Lucian was sitting in the private room with a deadpan expression. He stared at Roxanne like a beast targeting its prey. In that instant, the atmosphere of the room became very tense. Noticing something was amiss, Jonathan bumped Lucian on his arm discreetly before explaining to Roxanne with an innocent smile. When I got here, Lucian has just finished his appointment, so I invited him along since all of us know one another. Dr. Jarvis, you don't mind, do you? Outwardly, he seemed to be seeking Roxanne's permission. However, in truth, Roxanne did not have a choice. Since Lucian was already there, it would not be nice if she asked him to leave. Furthermore, Jonathan had no idea about them. If she showed an aversion toward Lucian, Jonathan might start asking questions. Roxanne had no wish for anyone to probe her about what had transpired between her and Lucian. The two men did not know what was on her mind, they only saw her dimmed expression. Noticing that there was no response from her, the two men exchanged glances. At that moment, Jonathan regretted his decision to bring Lucian along. He realized that it might have been too abrupt. I hope I don't cause more problems between the two of them. With the same deadpan expression on his face, Lucian got up and said, since Dr. Jarvis is here, I won't disturb the two of you. Ignoring their responses, Roxanne proceeded to sit down in front of Jonathan. When Jonathan saw that Lucian was still standing there, he stated quickly, Lucian, since Dr. Jarvis doesn't mind, join us. Recently, Dr. Jarvis Research Institute has encountered some problems. You may be able to help her. Lucian merely frowned before sitting down. Since Roxanne did not run away upon seeing him, he decided to stay on as well. However, Roxanne acted as if Lucian was not there after inviting him to join them. When the dishes were served, she raised her glass and remarked, thank you for helping me out with the herb suppliers, Mr. Queenie. Most Jonathan did not make a big deal out of it. Clinking glasses with her, he re-welcomed, Dr. Jarvis. I'm not the only one who has helped you with regard to this issue. Upon hearing that, Roxanne frowned, as she did not understand what he meant. Jonathan was about to say more when someone glared at him. Sensing Lucian's stare, Jonathan acted as if nothing happened and changed to another topic. If your research institute isn't that great, those herb suppliers won't be bothered with me. So, I think you have yourself to thank. Your abilities are outstanding. Roxanne smiled when she heard that. Have the herb suppliers come to a decision yet? If necessary, I can speak with them personally. After all, they would be working with her research institute even though they were doing that as a favor to Jonathan. With that, he was about to leave. It was only then that Roxanne returned to her senses and uttered, wait. You're a friend of Mr. Queen, Mr. Farwell, so you're always welcome. Please take a seat and join us for dinner. She would be the best person to explain the situation at the research institute. However, Jonathan shook his head. There will be no need to. A few of them have already agreed to cooperate with your research institute. However, you will still need to discuss the business proposal with them in detail. In other words, the deal had been sealed. All she needed to do now was to discuss the proposal with the herb suppliers. Seemingly pleased, Roxanne let out a sigh of relief. The issue with the herb suppliers had been bothering her for a long time. She could finally relax. The moment she resolved the issue for the research institute, she could relocate overseas with Archie and Benny without any worries. No one would ever give her any problems again. With that thought in mind, Roxanne subconsciously turned to look at Lucian. However, she met his unfathomable gaze, and it startled Beer. Lucian had yet to start eating. In fact, he had been listening to their conversation all the while. Since they were talking about business, he wanted to see Roxanne's reaction. He realized that she gradually relaxed as the discussion about the research institute went on. That was when his eyes dimmed. Once again, Roxanne had been under immense pressure, and he was not aware of it. When Roxanne turned to look at him, he failed to look away in time. Their gazes met for a long time before Roxanne returned to her senses. Clenching her fists hard, she averted his gaze. Her heart skipped a beat when she thought of the way Lucian looked at her. The notion of her going abroad made her glance at Lucian, but why was he looking at me? When Roxanne retracted her gaze, Lucian did the same, albeit unhappily. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.